The moment Mark Dalton sat across from the new CEO, his fate was sealed. "Your concerns are overblown and costly," said Lucas Wyn, his gaze cold and unyielding. "We need people who prioritize efficiency." Mark, 57, had been the plant operations manager at SteelCore Manufacturing in Dayton, Ohio for the past 14 years. He knew every machine, every safety protocol, and every risk that could cost someone their fingers, or worse. Lucas, freshly appointed just 7 months prior, was the kind of executive who wore expensive shoes to a factory floor and spoke in buzzwords like growth metrics, while stepping over oil spills left unattended. The warning signs started almost immediately. Quarterly safety trainings canceled, maintenance schedules loosened, critical repairs delayed, and safety warnings removed to reduce visual clutter. Mark quietly documented every violation, every ignored warning, every denied maintenance request. When he emailed the leadership about a failing hydraulic press with cracked safety shields, he recommended shutting it down immediately. Hours later, he was summoned to a meeting where Lucas delivered the blunt verdict: "Your priorities no longer align with our vision." 2 months severance and a quick exit. As Mark packed his desk, a mixture of fear and respect flickered in the eyes of colleagues like Vanessa from finance. Everyone knew the new CEO's ruthless cost-cutting was wrong. Mark didn't argue or protest. Instead, he quietly prepared to fight back. With years of experience and detailed records in hand, he was ready to expose the truth behind the facade of efficiency before any more lives were put at risk. After that final meeting with Lucas Wyn, Mark Dalton didn't rush home to lick his wounds. Instead, he drove to the company parking lot, sat quietly in his truck, and stared up at the massive SteelCore Manufacturing building, the place he'd devoted nearly half his life to. Memories flooded back: the late nights spent troubleshooting machines, the early mornings leading safety drills, the countless times he'd stepped in to protect workers from avoidable harm. This wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility he carried deep inside. Mark's career at SteelCore began humbly. At 19, fresh out of high school, he started on the factory floor operating stamping machines, learning the ins and outs of heavy industrial equipment. His father, a lifelong union worker, had given him simple advice that stuck: be the guy they can't replace. Mark took it seriously. Over 2 decades, he worked his way up, gaining the trust of workers and managers alike, eventually earning the role of plant operations manager. He knew the names of every employee and the history behind every machine. Safety was more than a checklist. It was a promise to families that their loved ones would return home at the end of the day. But times were changing. When Lucas arrived, everything shifted. The company culture that had once prized safety and craftsmanship was replaced by a single-minded focus on efficiency and profit margins. The quarterly safety training sessions Mark had championed were canceled without explanation. Maintenance schedules grew flexible, meaning deferred. Critical warning signs and safety guards began disappearing. Experienced workers who voiced concerns were quietly pushed out. Mark watched helplessly as the plant's heartbeat faltered. He remembered Tommy Wilson, a 26-year veteran, who had cornered him in the parking lot just days before being laid off. "You're the only one left who remembers how things should be," Tommy had said, voice low and urgent. Mark promised he wouldn't let SteelCore turn into a death trap. But the reality was harsh. Forced out with a perfunctory severance offer, Mark left the plant carrying a box of personal effects. Photos of his family, a coffee mug his daughter made in school, a few treasured mementos from decades at SteelCore. The weight of broken promises and compromised safety settled on his shoulders, but beneath it burned a quiet resolve. That evening, instead of retreating into despair, Mark went to the local library and spent hours organizing every piece of evidence. He had gathered emails documenting ignored maintenance requests, inspection reports, photos of blocked emergency exits, disabled machine guards, and leaking chemical containers. Every unsafe shortcut, every violated protocol was meticulously recorded. He drafted a detailed letter to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, outlining the systematic erosion of safety standards since Lucas had taken control. For months, Mark had tried working within the system, raising concerns through the chain of command, hoping for change. Now, freed from corporate constraints, he was determined to hold SteelCore accountable before tragedy struck. When OSHA finally launched an inspection, Mark's thorough documentation led to the uncovering of over 70 serious violations. The public attention was immediate and intense. Meanwhile, the injured worker whose accident had been the tipping point was recovering but faced life-altering consequences. Lucas Wright's attempts to deflect blame, including insinuating sabotage by a disgruntled ex-employee, Mark himself, fell flat under scrutiny. The truth was undeniable. Years of neglect and willful endangerment had put workers at risk in the name of short-term profits. With mounting pressure from regulators, workers, and the community, SteelCore's leadership was forced to make sweeping changes. Mark was called back, not to resume his old role, but to lead the charge as Director of Operational Safety and Compliance, with full authority to rebuild the plant's culture from the ground up. Mark's journey was a stark reminder that true leadership means protecting people over profits. Efficiency without safety is a ticking time bomb. Sometimes, standing up for what's right means risking everything. And when you do, you don't just save jobs, you save lives. Mark Dalton's return to SteelCore Manufacturing was far from a simple homecoming. Walking through the plant's entrance felt different this time. Less like stepping back into a familiar routine, and more like entering a battleground that needed to be reclaimed. The air was thick with the hum of machinery, but the mood was tense. Production lines were quiet, machines sat idle, and the absence of chatter among workers spoke volumes about the uncertainty lingering in the plant. His first order of business was to address the root of the crisis, the dangerously neglected safety protocols that had been systematically dismantled under Lucas Wright's leadership. Mark began by reviewing the exhaustive list of violations that OSHA inspectors had uncovered during their surprise visit. Over 70 major infractions, from missing machine guards to blocked emergency exits and untrained temporary workers operating high-risk equipment, painted a grim picture of negligence. Each violation wasn't just a number, it was a potential tragedy narrowly avoided. Mark assembled a task force including trusted colleagues like Terry Baker from maintenance and Vanessa Morris from finance, people who, like him, had been quietly documenting the erosion of safety standards and who shared his commitment to rebuilding the plant's integrity. Together, they worked tirelessly to prioritize repairs, retrain staff, and restore the safety culture that had once been SteelCore's hallmark. But the challenge was bigger than fixing broken machines. Morale had plummeted. The workforce was wary, some skeptical of management's promises, others haunted by fears of retaliation for speaking up. Mark understood that to rebuild trust, he had to lead with transparency and respect. He began holding open forums, inviting workers to voice concerns and participate in decision-making processes. He reinstated safety bonuses tied not just to production targets, but to accident prevention and proactive maintenance, a move that shifted the plant's focus from raw output back to sustainable, responsible work. Meanwhile, the legal fallout from the accident that had injured Jason Parker, the young worker whose arm was severely damaged on the neglected hydraulic press, cast a long shadow over the plant. Jason's story became a rallying point, a human face that reminded everyone of the real cost of cutting corners. Mark ensured that Jason received the best medical care and support, including full compensation and a guaranteed position once he was ready to return. This commitment sent a powerful message: SteelCore cared about its people. Behind the scenes, Mark worked closely with OSHA and local authorities, providing detailed evidence and facilitating ongoing investigations into the company's previous leadership. The mounting pressure culminated in the board's decision to place Lucas Wright on administrative leave, pending criminal charges for willful negligence, a rare but necessary step to signal that reckless disregard for worker safety would not be tolerated. As weeks turned into months, the plant began to heal. Repairs were completed, safety protocols re-established, and productivity gradually resumed, this time with workers empowered rather than oppressed. The air felt lighter. Workers who had once feared retaliation now saw their voices heard and their safety prioritized. The company's new safety committee, with real authority and direct board reporting, became a model for others in the industry. Mark's role as Director of Operational Safety and Compliance wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about transforming the plant's culture, shifting values back to respect for human life and dignity. His leadership brought a renewed sense of pride to SteelCore, as the plant not only met but exceeded industry safety standards, proving that doing the right thing and maintaining profitability were not mutually exclusive. In quiet moments, Mark reflected on the long journey, from the young factory floor worker to the man who had once been forced out for raising his voice, and now to the leader steering SteelCore toward a safer future. It was a testament to resilience, integrity, and the power of standing up when it mattered most. His story was a powerful reminder: in the relentless pursuit of efficiency and profit, human safety must never be compromised. Because in the end, no number on a spreadsheet is worth the cost of a life. After the initial shock of his termination, Mark Dalton refused to let despair take hold. He knew his fight was far from over. The concerns he had raised for months about Ironwood Forge's safety culture were not just ignored. They had been actively suppressed. He began methodically gathering every piece of evidence he could find: denied maintenance requests, emails highlighting safety violations, photos of blocked emergency exits, broken machine guards, and reports of inexperienced temps forced onto dangerous equipment. Mark compiled it all into a comprehensive dossier, intending to take it to the authorities who could make a real difference. Late one evening, with the files neatly organized and a detailed cover letter outlining the systematic dismantling of safety protocols, Mark drove to the nearest FedEx office and sent the package to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, in Columbus. That act felt like a release, a shift from fighting an unwinnable battle inside the company to seeking justice through official channels. Driving home, a calm washed over him, a quiet assurance that he was finally doing the right thing. 3 days later, Mark received a call from Patricia Simmons, an OSHA investigator. Their meeting was professional and thorough. Patricia listened intently as Mark explained the risks and ignored warnings, noting the discrepancies between Ironwood's spotless official records and the reality he had documented. It became clear that Ironwood's management had falsified reports and suppressed injury claims to protect their image and avoid regulatory scrutiny. Meanwhile, conditions inside the plant continued to deteriorate. Mark stayed in touch with his trusted colleagues, Terry Baker from maintenance and Vanessa Morris from finance, who quietly provided him with additional proof of ongoing negligence. Terry described how temps were barely trained and forced to operate the very press that injured Jason Parker, the young worker whose arm was severely damaged due to the company's reckless cost-cutting. Vanessa uncovered emails showing that Lucas Wyn, the CEO, had knowingly ignored manufacturer recommendations to shut down dangerous equipment, dismissing safety concerns as too expensive and unnecessary. These revelations painted a grim picture of willful endangerment, not mere oversight. Mark and his allies worked with their attorney to build a case that not only cleared his name from Lucas's baseless sabotage allegations, but exposed the systemic failures threatening everyone at Ironwood Forge. As OSHA's surprise inspection descended on the plant, Lucas's facade cracked. Over 78 serious violations were documented, and a media spotlight began shining on the company's unsafe practices. Public outrage grew when the story of Jason Parker's injury and the company's attempts to cover it up became widely known, sparking calls for accountability. Under mounting pressure, Ironwood's board took decisive action. Lucas Wyn was placed on administrative leave, and criminal negligence charges were pursued. In a surprising turn, the board reached out to Mark, asking him to return as acting plant manager to restore trust and oversee the sweeping safety reforms. Mark accepted, but on 2 firm conditions: that all safety issues be fully addressed before resuming production, and that Jason Parker receive full medical care, compensation, and a guaranteed job upon recovery. His return marked a new chapter for Ironwood Forge, one focused on people over profits, on rebuilding a culture where every worker's safety was paramount. 6 weeks into the overhaul, Mark stood alongside employees as the company announced a comprehensive safety restructuring. New protocols, increased maintenance budgets, and a worker representation committee promised lasting change. For the first time in years, hope replaced fear on the factory floor. Reflecting on the journey, Mark understood that standing up to powerful forces required courage, patience, and unwavering commitment. It wasn't just about a job lost or regained. It was about fighting for what's right, even when the costs seemed too high. Because at the end of the day, protecting lives is worth every battle. Mark Dalton's resolve only strengthened after he left Ironwood Forge. He knew that walking away from the plant didn't mean walking away from the problem. In fact, it was just the beginning. He began meticulously compiling every shred of evidence he had gathered over the months. Emails documenting denied maintenance requests, photos of safety hazards like blocked emergency exits and broken guards, inspection reports ignored by management, and notes detailing instances where inexperienced temps were pressured to operate dangerous machinery without proper training. Every detail was cataloged, every incident cross-referenced. With a heavy but determined heart, Mark drafted a comprehensive cover letter outlining the systematic breakdown of safety standards under Lucas Wyn's leadership. This was no longer just about his job or reputation. It was about preventing future accidents, protecting workers who still labored under dangerous conditions, and holding those responsible accountable. Late one evening, Mark drove to the nearest FedEx location and sent the entire dossier to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA office in Columbus, Ohio. That moment felt like a release, a shift from fighting a losing battle within the company walls to seeking justice through the right channels. Days later, Mark was contacted by Patricia Simmons, an OSHA investigator who had clearly done her homework. Their meeting was thorough and professional. Patricia asked detailed questions about the violations and inconsistencies, noting the stark contrast between Ironwood Forge's immaculate official safety records and the reality Mark had documented. She acknowledged the seriousness of the allegations and assured Mark that OSHA would conduct an inspection, though she warned it might take weeks to arrange. Meanwhile, inside the plant, conditions worsened. Mark stayed in close contact with trusted colleagues like Terry Baker, a seasoned maintenance supervisor, and Vanessa Morris from finance. They discreetly shared new evidence, emails revealing that Lucas had deliberately ignored manufacturer warnings about critical machinery, had cut corners on maintenance, and pressured workers to meet unrealistic production quotas regardless of safety risks. Terry described the lack of proper training for the temps now operating the hydraulic press, the very press that would later injure Jason Parker. As Mark pieced together the mounting evidence, it became clear this was no mere oversight. This was willful neglect and endangerment. His attorney reviewed the material and confirmed they had a strong case, not only to clear Mark's name from Lucas Wyn's false sabotage accusations, but also to expose the broader culture of unsafe practices. The OSHA team arrived unexpectedly, conducting a thorough inspection that lasted 3 intense days. Under Patricia Simmons' leadership, they uncovered more than 78 serious violations, from disabled emergency stops to missing guards and falsified accident reports. Media attention quickly followed. The local newspaper published an expose detailing the unsafe working conditions and the grievous injury of Jason Parker, whose arm had been severed after being forced to operate dangerous equipment without proper safeguards. Public outrage swelled as the community learned how management had prioritized profits over people. Under pressure, the Ironwood Forge Board took decisive action. Lucas Wyn was placed on administrative leave pending a formal investigation, and criminal negligence charges were filed. Then, surprisingly, the board reached out to Mark, asking him to return as interim plant manager to restore trust, oversee safety reforms, and help rebuild the devastated morale of the workforce. Mark agreed, but on 2 non-negotiable conditions. First, that every identified safety issue be fully resolved before production resumed. Second, that Jason Parker receive comprehensive medical care, full compensation, and a guaranteed position once he recovered and was ready to return to work. The board accepted these terms. Returning to Ironwood Forge felt bittersweet. The factory floor was eerily quiet, machines powered down for repairs and safety upgrades. Mark walked the plant with Terry, noting the tape blocking off the damaged hydraulic press and the workers carefully reinstalling guards and safety equipment. The work ahead was immense. Undoing months of reckless management would take time, patience, and vigilance. 6 weeks later, the company gathered all 300 employees for a meeting in the production area. The atmosphere was a mixture of tension and hope. Mark stood quietly as Greg Winters, son of the former owner, addressed the crowd. The newly reformed board now included retired floor workers and a dedicated safety officer. Greg announced sweeping reforms, new safety protocols, increased maintenance budgets, a bonus system rewarding both production and safety, and a worker representation committee empowered to influence decisions. Most importantly, Mark was introduced as the new Director of Operational Safety and Compliance, tasked with ensuring that worker safety was never again sacrificed for profit. The employees responded with heartfelt applause, not corporate formality but genuine appreciation from people who had lived the risks firsthand. Mark caught Jason's eye from across the room. Though Jason's arm was still healing, his smile and nod conveyed forgiveness, solidarity, and hope. Mark returned the gesture, feeling the weight of the battle slowly lifting. The journey was far from over. 3 months later, Mark attended Lucas Wyn's arraignment, where the former CEO faced multiple charges including criminal negligence causing serious injury. Lucas's attempt to shift blame onto Mark was dismissed, and his career was effectively over. Visiting Jason at his apartment, Mark found a determined young man adapting to life with a prosthetic arm, resolved to return to work. Over iced tea on the balcony, Jason asked why Mark had fought so hard despite the personal cost. Mark's answer was simple. Some things matter more than a paycheck. When you see something truly wrong, you have two choices: to look the other way or to do something about it. That night, as Mark drove home, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Ironwood Forge was finally on a safer path, and his fight had made a difference, not just for himself, but for every worker who would come after. True courage isn't just about standing up in the moment of conflict. It's about the persistence to keep fighting when the odds seem insurmountable. When you witness injustice, especially where lives are at stake, choosing to act can change not only your own path but the future of many. Don't settle for silence or complacency. Speak up, gather your strength, and be the change that protects those who can't protect themselves. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. Have you ever faced a situation where doing the right thing came with a heavy price? Your voice matters. Let's keep the conversation going. Don't forget to hit subscribe for more stories about courage, resilience, and standing up for what's right.